But it's like taking a piece of DNA and as a novel, and then building a whole character, a whole person out of it. These little minute, the hair and the binding, or the crumb, or whatever.
Oh, all of it was incredible. And you know, one of the reasons I like being a journalist is it gives you license to call people up and ask them questions and badger them for the details of their life and their work. And that novel particularly gave me that opportunity, because I was able to badger forensic, you know, legal forensic people and conservationists, and yeah, it was great. In
Year of Wonders, the little village where the people did not run away, the descriptions of the way one died from the plague are quite graphic and disturbing. How did you find out about that?
It's a bit like any time when there's a catastrophe, people take notice.
They write down things.
Write down things. And then I talk to a lot of doctors, because bubonic plague still exists. It just, now we've got antibiotics, so it's not such a big deal. But there's usually about 600 cases a year reported to the WHO.
I didn't know that. I thought you got rid of it.
No.
Along with smallpox. But...
No, it's out there. It's in New Mexico. The fleas carry Yersinia pestis is the bacterium that you want to stay away from.
That's for sure.
But it's not a serious, it's like a bad case of the flu now. They diagnose it, they give you antibiotics, 6 days later you're fine.
I'd like to find out a bit about how you work. Do you write every day?
I write, my entire working life, I'm like Pavlov's dog, and the bell in my case is the yellow school bus. The bus comes, the kids go, I work. The bus comes back, the kids are home, I stop. Not because the kids need me every minute anymore, they don't. It's just that that's the habit that I've got into.
I've talked to a number of women writers, including Alice Munro and numbers of others, who said that they started working either when their children went to bed at night or went to school during the day, that this was the only time they could work, which, of course, male novelists don't have to worry about, I guess.
Let's hope a few of them worry about it a bit more than... But, you know, I loved what Anne Enright said about, you know, the famous quote about the baby carriage in the hall is the enemy to great writing. And she said, that's BS. The baby carriage in the hall is the enemy to great drinking.
Sounds like an Enright. Do you...
But I think that I wouldn't know, you know, I think my work would be, yeah, occasionally it'd be really great to be down the rabbit hole and say, go away, I'm not cooking dinner, I'm going to work all night and all that. But it's not realistic. That's not how the world is. And there's so much upside to spending time with children, even just, you know, for a writer, because their imaginations are so... The connections that they make in their games, you hear them making up stories and you think, great idea. And also reading children's literature to them is, you know, I think that's one of the reasons we adopted our second child, was because my older son was too old to read to anymore and I was really missing it. Because kids authors understand that plot is absolutely central. And that X has to lead to Y, and that X needs to be really interesting, and Y needs to be even more interesting than that. And I would be reading something like Philip Pullman to my son, and then he'd go to sleep, and I'd set it aside, and then I'd go and pick up my lovely, luminous literary novel. And I go, this is boring.
Do you work on a computer?
Yeah.
You don't write in longhand and then go to the computer? I've heard writers say that when they get into a novel, they don't know what their characters are going to do next.
Yeah.
I've never really believed that.
It's true.
It is true?
Yeah.
But they're yours. You know, you must know what they're going to do next.
Yeah, but you don't. Isn't that odd?
Yes.
You know, so I didn't know who Bethia was going to marry. At all. No. Complete you know, it's like you're a miner and you're tapping away at the rock, and then all of a sudden you get a little seam and you follow it, and, you know, I don't know if it's like that for everybody, but I'm kind of very instinctive with my writing. I don't have a outline or anything. I generally have the architecture of the truth, the historical story that has intrigued me. And so I follow that line of fact as far as I can.
But you don't put little Post-it notes up on the wall and follow the plot and everything?
No.
Have you ever gotten deep into a novel and realized that it's the wrong voice? I asked because Guy Vanderhaeghe, the Canadian novelist, told me once that he was something like 80,000 words into a book, and he said it's all wrong, and he threw it out, started over again. Has that ever happened to you?
Absolutely, because with the people of the book, my book conservator was going to be Bosnian. She's going to be Sarajevan. And Sarajevans have this unbelievably beautiful way of expressing themselves. And it's so many layers of so many different things. There's a kind of Ottoman politesse, and then there's a kind of a Slavic soulfulness, and then there's a kind of a mordant wit that seems to have come from shifting under a sort of a socialist system. And then when I was there was also the kind of heartache of the war. And I couldn't get it. My conservator sounded false to me. She was just not working. I had 80 pages of her. And it had to go. It just, you know, I hadn't spent enough time in Sarajevo, I guess, to hear the voices in my head enough to be able to have that person, that friendly ghost, talking in my ear.
But you could make her an Australian, though. Well,
that was... I thought, who can I hear? Who can I hear? Crikey!
When you're writing dialogue, do you hear it in your head?
Yeah.
Do you ever say it out loud to yourself?
I read it when it's done, because I've found that you really got to read it all out loud, because you can't tell where the clunky bits are until you read it out loud.
Cadence and
the extra words that you didn't need. And there's always a few that creep through, and then when the book comes out and you're actually reading it, you realize, oh God, I could have done without that adjective. You know, so there's always some that creep through, but I do like to read it aloud. So.
Do you rewrite?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Boy, you can really tell the bits where you haven't done as much rewriting.
A lot? I mean, how you would...
It depends. You know, some bits really a lot, and some bits seem to have come out nicely and you don't rewrite them, but later on when you go back you think, oh, that could have gone through the another round.
When you finish a novel, is it a cathartic thing? Do you feel you have to start another one right away, or you take time off, or what do you do?
There's that one moment of ecstatic bliss when you hit the send key. But usually what happens with me is you're in the nitty-gritty of writing a book, and you get to the hardest part, and it's no longer this wonderful, easy thing. And it's a bit like when you're married, and, well, not married, say you go to a dance with a date, and you see somebody really handsome across the room, and he's looking at you. And you look, and then you think, oh, I have to leave with the one I came with. And that's how it is. There's always that new book idea that's bright and shiny, and it's going to be so much easier than this one, because that's the honeymoon period. You know, you haven't woken up next to it in the morning yet, you know.
So what do? Do you put it off?
Yeah, you put it off, but you've got this kind of flirtation with the new idea, so I'm usually pretty keen to get started on the next thing.
What about critics? Now, I haven't been able to find a bad review of Geraldine Brooks.
Oh, you haven't looked very hard.
Well, I haven't checked the Australian press.
No, the Australians have been largely very kind, but I've been flayed alive twice in the New York Times Book Review. First, for Year of Wonders, they hated it, and March, they hated it even more.
They love Caleb.
They loved Caleb. Bless their hearts. Yes.
So
That was Jane Smiley. Smiley indeed.
So you do read reviews?
Of course. Yeah,
Well, some people say, no, I never, pardon me, I never read them.
No, I'm not so cocky
I think they're lying, but...
as to think I don't have something to learn from critics, you know. So, yeah, no, I read them. The first time I got lacerated by the New York Times, I was really bummed out. It was my first novel, and I thought, oh, maybe I'm really crap at this, and I wanted to go back to bed for a week. But lo and behold, readers felt differently, and people bought that book, and they kept reading it, and that was all that matters in the end. If you've got readers, then you can put food on the table. And so the next time I got skewered, I didn't care as much.
It's been said that every working journalist has a manuscript, you know, in the bottom drawer and so on. But not many can make the transition.
I never had it in the bottom drawer. It never occurred
Never occurred to you to write a novel?
No. It was beyond the ambit claim of my imagination. Yeah. I loved journalism, for one thing. Every day of it was exciting and different, and I thought it was an absolute privilege to be able to, you know, watch history unfolding. And I was cruising. I just never thought about doing anything else until I had some enforced quiet time in the slammer in Nigeria. And I realized I was 39 years old. And if I didn't get on with having a family, it would be too late to do so. And I didn't know how long the Nigerians were going to keep me.
Why were they keeping you anyway? Did you not turn over your bank account or answer one of those emails? Or what?
I was covering Shell's outrageous activities in the Niger Delta with regard to the Ogoni people. And at that time, this is a long time ago now, the Ogoni had started a peaceful protest.
Ken Saro-Wiwa was, right?
Yeah, it was Ken Saro-Wiwa, exactly. He came to New York City and talked to the Journal Foreign Editor and outlined what seemed to us to be a completely outlandish story of unarmed peasant farmers being fired on by the goons of the Abacha regime at the behest of Shell, who had left oil spills on their farmland for 35 years without cleaning them up, and were just behaving in ways that I didn't credit that any modern Fortune 500 company would still try and get away with. But because it was out of sight, out of mind. And so I went there, and everything Ken had said checked out, and worse. And then, as you do as a journalist, I went to the military to get their side of the story. Big mistake. So they handed me over to the secret police, and they threw me in this lockup in Port Harcourt.
For how long?
Well, I didn't know how long, so that was the point. And I thought, you're 39. If they keep you even a year, you've probably blown it for having a family, you know. And it never occurred to me. I thought I had all the time in the world, so it was a big wake-up call. And they only kept me for 3 days. And then they deported me.
God.
And I went home and greeted Tony with great enthusiasm.
Just before we get some questions, I dare not, I don't know if I should ask this, but are you working on something now, and can you say anything about it? Or
I normally would be, but instead of getting stuck into the shiny new idea, I was invited to guest edit Best American Short Stories. So I spent my winter reading instead of writing. And so when I left Martha's Vineyard, there was a goose sitting on her nest, and no matter what you did, she would not get up, because the eggs were too fragile. So I think my new idea is still a bit of a fragile egg, so I think I'll keep sitting on it.
And you're sitting on the nest. Yeah. Geraldine Brooks, ladies and gentlemen. There's a microphone here in the middle of the aisle. And I'm sure you'll take some questions.
Yes,
This
please.
is as she said, a conversation. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for your very nimble wit. I enjoyed it tremendously. You immersed yourself so thoroughly, emotionally and factually in the life of the Native Americans and their interaction with the European invaders. However, there are situations, I don't know how similar, but like that in Australia.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could comment, compare the two briefly.
Yeah. Actually, when I first embarked on this project, I was thinking very much with an Australian's awareness of the issue of the stolen generations, which was the forcible removal of Aboriginal children from their families, and they were taken and put into white schools. And I was wondering if Caleb was a stolen child in that sense, whether he'd been uprooted from his culture against his will. And I decided that that wasn't the case because of this, what we were discussing earlier about the Native American embrace of literacy, and also there was a different tradition in Native American tribal life, particularly for Songkem's sons like Caleb, that they often would go away and live with another tribe for a number of years to see what they could learn that would be of use to their own people and then bring it back to the tribe later. So I think he was much more in his, there wasn't a parallel there that I thought there might be. And I think he really embraced his destiny as a scholar, and my evidence for that is that he stayed at Harvard. He was a man by then, and he could have left, and many Native Americans did leave the Indian College. They decided it wasn't the place that they wanted to be, and they went off, and one famously became a mariner, and others, we don't know what they did, but we know that they didn't pursue their education. But I think the fact that Caleb finished and graduated, we can infer that he embraced his destiny as an intellectual in that way, and he was in the place that he wanted to be. The dispossession of Australian Aborigines has striking parallels with the situation of Native Americans, but there are also significant differences. And part of it was that Aboriginal society really didn't seek much of anything from the white colonizers except to be left alone. And there wasn't anything basically that we had that they wanted. And the famous example of that is when Governor Phillip with the First Fleet leaves a whole lot of trade goods on the beach. The Aborigines pick them up, have a look at everything, and then leave them and walk away. So.
Did Australia have a system of residential schools where the young Aboriginals were taken away and sent to school?
Yeah, and outrageously so, very much against their families' will, and there was deliberate obfuscation so the parents didn't know where their children were. It was a brutal, horrible system, and it persisted till 1970.
It's the same thing in Canada. There were residential schools up to the 70s here with Indian children. But there has been, in Australia, as I understand it, there has been a Truth and Reconciliation Commission of some kind?
There is reconciliation. It's an ongoing process. We just had Reconciliation Week in Australia a week and a half ago. And there is a telling of stories, and, you know, there's been a formal apology by the government of Australia. But it's still absolutely people, the mortality and morbidity statistics for Aboriginal Australians are still disgraceful. The discrepancies are appalling, and public policy, you know, has flailed around for the last couple of decades trying to come up with something, and still floundering, many initiatives still very controversial, still very unwelcome in Indigenous.
It's the same way in Canada. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, a question for, like, I know you have written books and stuff. What is the longest books you have written, and how long did it take?
How long do they take? It's a hard question to answer because you're always thinking about one before you start writing it. So with my first novel, I'd been thinking about the story of Eam, and it had been kicking around in my head for 10 years before I decided that I was going to try and write a novel. And do you count those 10 years when you're chewing on the material and the information or not? So if you just look at how long it seems to take between books, it seems like it takes about 2.5 years, but I don't know.
Are you